But yeah, I definitely think that the most competitive areas are infrastructure, the general infrastructure, cross-chain infrastructure, and also things like bridging, everything. I count all of that as infrastructure, and then DeFi, of course. There's a lot of competition in DeFi, and AI. And so I really do think that in the next 5 years, we're going to see more specialization within blockchains, but at the same time, starting to see more interconnectedness as different chains lean on each other's specialties.
지금부터 이 대세 상승장 전반을 준비해야 되는데 2분기는 가장 중요하다고 볼 수 있습니다. 역대 사이클 중에서 투자 난이도는 가장 높다고 저도 확신할 수 있는데, 이 투자 난이도가 높다라고 해서 투자의 원칙이 바뀌는 건 아니다라고 늘 강조를 드렸죠. 결국은 암호화폐 시장에는 검증된 성공 공식이 있다는 겁니다. 가장 정점에 이르는 그 과정들을 포기하고 지금 후퇴를 한다? 있을 수 없는 일입니다. 네, 그러면 2부 이어서 해보겠습니다. 오늘 토크라운지 함께 해주실 우리 초대 손님은 스토리 재단의 안드레아 무토니 재단 이사장님입니다. 2부를 이제 진행을 할 텐데, 1부에서는 스토리와 관련된 이야기들, 그리고 AI와 IP 관련된 이야기들을 중점적으로 나눠봤습니다. 2부에서는 이것보다 약간 더 범위를 넓혀서 시장 전망에 대한 부분들을 좀 말씀을 드릴 테니까요. 우리 크롱님들 좀 중요한 이야기들 많이 나눌 거니까 끝까지 함께 해주시면 감사하겠습니다. 자, 먼저 첫 번째 질문입니다. 2025년 시장에 대한 기대감들이 굉장히 많이 있었던 상황에서 시장이 좀 어떤 돌발 변수에 의해서 많이 악재를 겪고 있는데, 여기에 대해서 일부에서 어떻게 생각하시는지를 한번 여쭤봤었는데, 향후 남은 기간 2025년 어떻게 시장이 갈 것 같은지와, 그리고 최근 비트코인과 중요한 알트코인에서 좀 주목할 만한 트렌드들이 있는지 궁금합니다.
You're asking me an impossible question, mainly because there's so much uncertainty and so much, it's impossible to predict what will happen through the rest of the year. I do think though that, and we covered a little bit of this in the previous video, but I do think that what we're going to see, regardless of how the markets react, because as we've seen, the markets are completely, it's not a matter of crypto cycle now. It's a matter of global cycles. We are in a global cycle of very much unpredictability, heightened tensions. So really, as a crypto industry, we kind of have to tune that out, and we need to continue to focus on substance, right? That's the only way in which, in the long term, we're going to come out ahead. And what I would advise everyone watching, and what I would, would love also for myself to kind of focus on, is, okay, what are the projects that, regardless of how the market is behaving, what are they doing that improves the world in some way? I think that's the only important question. It's like, are they doing anything that improves the world or solves a problem that the world has in some way, right? Because a lot of projects are just finding problem or creating solutions for problems they haven't found yet, or they're kind of just copying and pasting what others have done already. And so I really feel like being able to hone in on what is the problem a project is solving is a very important aspect. Like, for example, there's a lot of talk now about storage, right? Something like Walrus, like, okay, they're solving a problem of, okay, how do we improve decentralized storage, right? Okay, that could be an interesting one. Story, right? Which is, okay, how do we bring the $60 trillion asset class of IP on chain, make it more liquid, make it programmable and easy to create logic around, and be able to trade and be able to license and basically like bring this whole asset class that has been on pen and paper in the digital realm, right? I think those are the kind of litmus tests / guiding principles that I would follow. Is what are the projects that are really focusing on that? And I think even within the story ecosystem, there are some very interesting projects that I think are worth mentioning that are introducing some pretty new concepts that, again, are focused more on substance. Like for example, we have an ecosystem project called Aria. The Aria protocol is essentially tokenizing the royalty streams of some of the top artists in the world, like Justin Bieber, like BTS, like Blackpink, Aspa. There's like a ton of different artists. And if you go to Aria protocol and their asset page, you'll see they have a ton of songs. And what they're doing is, okay, they're an example of IP-Fi, which is what we call DeFi for IP-Fi. And they are essentially being able to, much like DeFi offers yield, but that yield is usually generated through, incentives of some sort, which could more or less be unsustainable. Aria offers yield by being able to, by collecting the royalty streams of these songs that have real world revenue and using that as the yield generation aspect, right? And I think that's a very interesting concept of, okay, how do we, introduce these new primitives using this asset class called IP? That's one example. And I can get into more, but I know that I've been talking for a while, so I'll pause here for a second.
네, 이사장님 말씀에 공감할 수밖에 없는 게 사실은 시장의 불확실성을 예측해서 무언가를 움직이는 것은 무리수가 있습니다. 누구도 시장의 이 방향성을 정확하게 예측할 수가 없고요. 시장은 우리의 어떤 기대들이나 예상을 훨씬 더 뛰어넘는 변동성과 돌발 변수들이 존재합니다. 그렇기 때문에 투자의 관점에서도 그렇고 산업의 관점에서도 그렇고 결국은 이 시장이 가장 근본적으로 향하고 있는 방향성들, 즉 본질을 봐야 된다는 부분들을 우리가 다시 한 번 더 상기할 수 있었습니다. 자, 거기에 덧붙여서 스토리프로토콜 말씀을 주시면서 이 아리아 프로토콜이라고 하는 IP-파이라고 하는 새로운 개념에 대해서도 언급을 주셨는데요. 결국은 우리는 이런 변화의 흐름들을 가장 먼저 선점을 하고 계속해서 지켜보는 것이 중요하지 않을까 생각을 합니다. 자, 그러면 이렇게 IP 산업 관련해서 스토리라고 하는 프로젝트가 많이 어떤 영향력을 발휘하고 있다고 했을 때 현재 암호화폐 생태계에서 경쟁이 치열하게 일어나고 있는 분야들도 분명히 있습니다. 그래서 이사장님 보시기에 현재 암호화폐 생태계에서 경쟁이 가장 치열한 분야는 어디라고 생각하시는지 궁금합니다.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's two broad areas, actually three areas that are, I know you asked for one, but I give you three. Areas that I think have the most competition, which is, of course, AI is very, very competitive. There's a ton of different infrastructure projects around AI, around, whether it's to tokenize the models, whether it's to have a decentralized compute, whether it's to, have inference be token run. Like there's a ton of, much like in Web 2, there's a ton of competition in AI and everyone's creating an AI project now. In Web 3, there's also a lot of competition in AI. I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, I think competition is good, right? Because we have so many different opportunities to see different examples of how things could be done. The same problem can be solved in different ways, right? So AI is one. I think the general infra layer has a lot of competition, right? Wallets, storage, identity, like multi-sig, like all of these infrastructure layers have probably, I feel, and I don't think it's like the right amount, but like personally, I feel that when I go to a conference, 80% of the projects I talk to, the projects I see at booths are all infrastructure. Maybe even more, maybe 90%, right? Everyone's focusing on the infrastructure because the infrastructure is, let's say, the easier thing to focus on. Because if you focus on the infrastructure, then you say, okay, now that the infrastructure is here, others can build on it, right? You don't have to think about what's to build. And that's why, for example, at Story, we are laser focused on not just building out the infrastructure, but also the protocol and also working very closely with applications like Aria or more DeFi applications or more consumer-focused applications like Ablo, which help do fashion remixing, for example, working or AI remixing with Mahojan, and like there's a lot of projects that we can get into, and or also in this book, if you read it, we're really working closely with them because we really want to show and help people understand, like, hey, this is Now that IP is made programmable, here's all that you can do with it, right? So there's also a very important education aspect. But yeah, I definitely think that the most competitive areas are infrastructure, the general infrastructure, cross-chain infrastructure, and also things like bridging, everything. I count all of that as infrastructure, and then DeFi, of course. There's a lot of competition in DeFi, and AI. Yeah.
네, 어떻게 보면 말씀 주신 분야들이 지금 현 시점에서 가장 많이 활발하게 프로젝트가 이루어지고 있는 분야들인데, AI의 경쟁에 대한 부분들도 이제 굉장히 인상적이었는데, 인프라스트럭처 관련해서 인프라스트럭처를 이제 구축하는 그 프로젝트가 진입 장벽이 높지 않다라는 부분들과 더불어서 이것만으로는 프로젝트에서 또 성공을 하기가 쉽지 않다라는 부분들도 좀 새삼 느낄 수가 있었습니다. 결국은 우리가 인프라스트럭처와 더불어서 이것들을 더 근본적으로 성장시킬 수 있는 이 자반들이 더 많이 만들어져야 되지 않을까, 그런 생각들을 하게 됐는데요. 자, 그럼에도 우리가 결국은 시장에서 가장 중요한 부분들은 많은 프로젝트들이 본질을 향해 가고 있다는 부분들이었습니다. 결국은 민코인 같은 그런 일시적인 유행, 물론 민코인에 대한 유행들이 계속해서 앞으로도 지속될 가능성이 있지만, 결국은 우리가 중장기적으로 3년, 5년을 바라봤을 때는 결국은 가장 본질적인 프로젝트에 주목을 해야 된다는 부분들이 가장 핵심 메시지라고 생각을 하는데요. 그런 관점에서 봤을 때 향후 3년에서 5년간 블록체인 업계에서 가장 큰 변화는 어떤 것들이 될까요?
I think there's a quote that I really love. I think it's from Bill Gates, which says, people overestimate the change that can happen in 2 years, but underestimate the change that can happen in 10 years, right? And I think 3 to 5 years is that middle ground where it's far enough into the future that a lot of things could change, but not so far into the future that everything can change, right? And so in some ways, I do think that in the next 5 years, we will be in a transition phase of what we've seen so far. So to be completely transparent, I do think that the beauty of Web3 and crypto is it's a sandbox. Anyone can do whatever they want, right? That's the beauty of it. It's also part of the problem with it, meaning that, bad actors can do bad things with it, and degens can do stupid things with it. But who am I to say that meme coins are bad? I think if people want to gamble with meme coins, like, go ahead, right? And so I do think that preserving that level of freedom of, hey, this is an open playground. These are the tools, and you can create whatever you want with them, I think is important. And we'll continue to see these types of experiments, whether it's meme coins, whether it's new forms of human behavior experiments. I do believe that there's always going to be this layer of exploration, more on the speculative side. I do think that, though, in the next 5 years, and this is just starting this year, like, for example, with the Grayscale research, there's going to be a more and more focus on utility-driven use cases and utility-driven applications. Because in the last 5 years, the whole narrative was general purpose, right? You need to build the most general purpose blockchain possible so that you can enable everything, right? You shouldn't be opinionated. Now we're starting to shift more towards, you shouldn't do everything mediocrely. You should focus on doing one thing really, really well and proving that you can do it, right? So we've seen this happen in the last year or so, for example, with Hyperliquid, right? That just focused on being a decentralized exchange. Now with new focused projects like, Walrus that I mentioned earlier, obviously Story focusing on IP. And I do think that focusing on one thing really fulfills that vision that everyone has been talking about for the last 3-4 years around multi-chain future. Nothing can be multi-chain if everyone tries to do everything, right? Because why would I use multi-chain if the two alternatives are general purpose blockchains? There's no reason. But what if I am building some software or some application that has a component of IP, has a component of trading, and needs to store data? Then I could use all three, Hyperliquid, Story, and Walrus, for example, because I know that they're the best option for those three things, right? This is just like a hypothetical example. I'm not saying that those are the three, things that you need to use or focus on, but what I'm trying to get at is that the multi-chain future that everyone seems to be promising and hoping for is actually much more likely the more chains and networks focus on solving specific areas and hyper optimizing on those so that you can use different chains as modules for different use cases in your application. And so obviously Story is, solving the IP issue. So even if your assets are off chain on another chain, you can still register them on Story, and all of the IP related functionality lives on Story, right? All of the monetization. And so I really do think that in the next 5 years, we're going to see more specialization within blockchains, but at the same time, starting to see more interconnectedness as different chains lean on each other's specialties.
네, 우리가 시장의 어떤 방향성들을 이야기할 때 일반적으로 처음에는 뭔가 보편화된 어떤 시장들이 형성이 되지만 사실 그 산업이 발전하면 발전할수록 조금 더 특수 목적을 가지고 있는 조금 더 세분화되면서 각 분야들이 발전을 하게 됩니다. 그래서 지금 현재 블록체인 산업도 그런 과도기에 와 있는 것이 아닌가라고 생각을 하고 있고 이사장님도 여기에 대해서 전환기라는 표현을 쓰시면서 뭔가 변화의 가장 중요한 국면에 있다라고 말씀을 주셨습니다. 자, 그리고 여기서 이런 과정에서 결국은 중요한 것이 어떤 특정한 유스 케이스들, 어떤 성과들을 만들고 실제로 어떤 사례들을 만들어내고 있는가 그런 부분들이 굉장히 중요하다고 생각을 하는데요. 그런 관점에서 스토리와 관련된 부분들 한번 말씀을 드려보면은 일단 IP와 관련된 인프라를 많이 만들어내는데 집중을 했고 이후에는 이제 애플리케이션 기반으로 해서 새로운 유스 케이스들, 뭔가 혁신적인 유스 케이스들을 만들어내야 되는 과도기에 와 있다고 볼 수 있는데 이 스토리에서 그리고 있는 이 그림들, 어떤 형태로 이 흐름들이 발전하게 될지 이 부분들이 굉장히 궁금합니다.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a protocol and an infrastructure layer is only as useful as it's being used, right? And so the application layer is really the most important thing, and the Story ecosystem is, I would say, the reason I'm most bullish about Story, because even though we've only been on mainnet since 7 weeks, so very recently, we already have some very interesting projects. If you go through the storybook, if you search 4 Pillars storybook, you'll have like a full list of all of the ecosystem projects. But I'm going to focus on a couple examples from different areas to kind of answer your question. Okay, so I think there's 4 or 5 main categories. There's DeFi, there's AI, there's consumer, and there's which are more like consumer creative, and then there's creatives, and then there's like a speculation as well. So on the DeFi side, I think aside from Aria, which we already discussed, right? Aria, which allows you, which basically tokenizes the top music IPs in the world and has plans to expand beyond that. Is one really tangible example is that, okay, now instead of just listening to your favorite artist, you can actually basically kind of stake on your favorite artist and earn from the royalties, which I think is a really novel concept. Aside from that, we also have a company called Vario, for example, that does more traditional DeFi liquid staking. But what they've also introduced recently is IP restaking. So what if you can restake to pledge confidence in specific IPs? That can be one of the parameters in which you can judge an IP on how reliable it is or how much you care about it, right? So that's a very interesting mechanic that's just started, but I think could lead to some really interesting use cases. So for example, okay, how do we do IP validation through IP restaking? Not just for Story, but potentially for governments, right? So that's on the DeFi side. And then of course in the ecosystem, we have more traditional DeFi applications like DEXs, we have the lending protocols, we have that as well. I think the second pillar I mentioned was more on the AI side. One example is Mahojin, right? What we talked about in the first video was how important it is for AI to attribute what is being used as training and what comes out of the model when someone asks for an image or text, right? And Mahojan is doing just that. Mahojan is a platform that essentially abstracts away all of the pipeline of generating an image from prompt to models to LoRa's, any kind of like model related attributes, and then the output. So you can browse the outputs. You can see an image that you really like and say, oh, I really like that style. I want to create something like that. Without Mahojan, you would have to kind of like reverse engineer how that image is created, right? You would have to kind of say, okay, it looks like this. Can you make it look like this? With Mahojan, since they have all of the pipeline, they know exactly what prompt was used to generate it. They know exactly what model was used. They know exactly what additional models or fine-tunings were used. You can remix the original prompt and go through the same pipeline, right? So it's like basic native remixing of images that are generated via AI. And since they are the platform that knows exactly what models are being used, they know exactly what prompts are being used, they can register all of this content on Story and also register derivatives as basically childs of the parent image that was used as inspiration. I would say, like, in other words, like native AI remixing with built-in attribution and licensing, which I think is really cool. So that's on the AI side, right? On the creator side, it's very interesting. We're working with a company called Magma. Magma is a Web2 company. They have 3 million users, right? And they don't know about Web3. They don't care about Web3, but they care about drawing. So Magma is like Figma. You know Figma? But for artists. So it's like a collaborative painting canvas where artists can paint together. And what artists really care about is, how do I protect my IP? And how do I make sure that it doesn't get used for AI training? And how do I set terms on my IP? So with Magma, they were really excited about Story because when you finish an artwork on Magma, you can soon go to File, and instead of just export to PNG, you can go to File, register artwork, and register it on Story seamlessly through Magma without even touching a wallet. All of that happens behind the scenes. All of that is abstracted because really at the end of the day, crypto is just one layer of the technological stack, right? Users shouldn't have to care whether something is powered by Web3 or powered by Web2. Like, it should all be hidden, right? And Magma is a perfect example of this, of these 3 million artists can finally register their IP with one click and choose their terms seamlessly without any worry. And the last example I'll give you is more on the consumer side, which is Ablo. Ablo is a company that is basically revolutionizing the way that fashion is done. Today, fashion is very much top-down. I, the designer of Gucci or, Balmain or Dolce & Gabbana, I decide how something should look and everyone buys it and that's it. But what if I decide, I create a piece of clothing, I create a shoe, I create something, and what if the users could personalize it and register that? And if it gets enough popularity, what if I can then sell that? And the creator of that variation, that creator of that personalization also gets a cut, right? So it's basically fashion remixing from the people that care the most about the brand, right? And one example that they're working with right now, they're already working with top brands like Balmain and a bunch of like top fashion labels, but they're also working with Crocs. You know Crocs? I wear Crocs all the time. You know how Crocs have the gibbets, the little things that you put in the holes of the Crocs? You can, right now through Ablo, fans can create their own gibbets. And if those gibbets get sold and get bought by others, Crocs get a cut, Ablo gets a cut, and the creator gets a cut. Everyone is fairly attributed. And all of this happens on Story. So it's a very, very, tangible and practical application of, if we can make IP registration, licensing, royalty distribution as seamless as possible, it makes it easy for any company in the world to add this to their stack without having to deal with massive legal teams and do all of this manually. It can all be done programmatically. And I think this is really, really exciting. So, I know that meme coins are a polarizing topic. Some people love them, some people hate them, a lot of people hate them. But if you think about it, meme coins are IP. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is not that the meme coins themselves are IP, but what they represent is IP. Mm-hmm. Most meme coins that are created are based off of IP, mm-hmm. right? Whether it's a character, whether it's a pet, that's name, image, and likeness, whether it's famous, whether it's a combination of characters, whether it's random concepts. A lot of them are IP and different forms of IP. And traditionally, what happens with meme coins is a random team, right, creates a meme coin based on something that they don't own, based on an IP that they don't own, whether it's like a viral TikTok video, whether it's a famous character. And the author of that IP doesn't get anything. The few times that the author got something is because the team has proactively offered to give back something to the author of the IP, right? But that's only been in rare cases. But what if this could be different? What if even in the speculation layer, right, there could be native attribution of where the IP comes from? And we have an ecosystem project on Story called IP.world. And it does exactly that. It's basically a meme coin launchpad, but a portion of the supply is always reserved for the IP owner. Mm-hmm. And for the IP owner to claim that portion, they have to verify themselves. And they also get all of the revenue from the liquidity pools. So basically, it's a meme coin launchpad where the IP holder is put first. I'm personally not someone who likes to trade meme coins because I always lose money. Every time I've tried, I've always lost money. But I think it's very important, given that, as we discussed earlier, crypto is a set of tools that means anyone can do anything. It's important that if they do decide to do more speculative aspects, that the IP is still respected and that the IP owner still gets something back. And I think that's something that I'm happy to see happen on Story through IP.world.
네, IP와 관련해서 굉장히 많은 고민들을 하고 계시다는 것들을 유스 케이스를 보면서 더 확인할 수 있었는데요. 특히나 AI와 디파이, 소비자, 창작자, 거기다가 투기 분야인 민코인 관련된 분야들까지 같이 고려를 해서 이 흐름들이 어떻게 창작자들에게 도움이 될지, 이것들이 어떻게 투자의 관점에서 봤을 때는 어떻게 수익으로 연결될 수 있을지, 이런 부분들도 감안을 한 시스템들이 구축이 되고 있고요. 특히나 민코인 관련해가지고 어떤 IP의 일종으로서 창작자들에게 어떤 보상이 돌아갈 수 있게 만들 수 있는지, 이런 것들이 개인적으로는 좀 많이 흥미로웠습니다. 자, 그리고 만약에 또 추가적으로 유스 케이스 관련해서 확인하고 싶으신 분들은요, 제가 일부에서도 간단하게 소개해드렸는데 포퓰러스 리서치에서 스토리 관련된 보고서가 있습니다. 제가 고정 댓글 달아드릴 테니까요, 관심 있으신 분들은 확인해 주시면 좋겠습니다. 자, 그러면 2부 마지막으로 두 가지 질문만 드리고 이제 마무리를 해볼 텐데요. 자, 이렇게 IP라고 하는 분야들이 아무래도 규제와 좀 관련이 된 분야들이고, 더욱이 지금 암호화폐 자체가 아직까지는 규제에 대한 부분들이 완전히 해결이 되지 않은 상황입니다. 그러다 보니까 이 규제 환경이 어떻게 전개될지, 이런 부분들, 그리고 각 국가들마다 어떤 차이가 있을지에 대한 부분들이 많은 관심사일 수 있는데요. 이런 규제 환경들이 암호화폐 산업의 글로벌 확장에 어떤 영향을 미치게 될지, 어떤 방향으로 가게 될지 한번 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
Yeah, so I do feel that at every cycle, the legitimization of crypto is getting closer and closer, right? Obviously, the most recent, the last, 4 months have been quite interesting in the crypto space. From the president of the USA launching a meme coin to, obviously the Bitcoin and Ethereum ETFs. We see that the world is slowly absorbing crypto, right? It's not going to be like, okay, now crypto is 100% available. It's more like slowly it becomes more and more institutionalized and more accepted. And I think the biggest driving factor of this institutionalization and acceptance is kind of on us as the crypto industry to prove to the governments, to prove to the people that what is being done is actually beneficial for everyone, right? And so, I don't think that a lot of the recent activity has been particularly helpful in demonstrating that when it comes to, the last 4 months and the craziness of the last 4 months. But I do think that there's always good that comes out of trying things. There's always good that comes out of getting familiar with, oh, okay, so this is a wallet. Oh, okay, so this is how crypto works. Okay. And people will slowly get to understand it, right? And I think it just takes time for technology to permeate the general population. So when it comes to regulation, I think it's not going to be an all or nothing. It's not going to be crypto is regulated or crypto is not regulated. I think different layers of crypto will be regulated in different ways, right? So maybe on the DeFi aspect, there might be more, I imagine, over time, more regulations around, obviously tax implications. For example, the Italian government recently raised the capital gains tax on crypto, unfortunately. There's obviously going to be potentially more requirements on KYC and KYB from governments for anyone dealing with crypto. But that's just the nature of governments. They need to know, that there's no criminal activity happening, right? So that's on the DeFi and more monetary aspect. I think on the use cases, it'll be industry by industry, right? So for example, Story, right? We're focusing on IP. We're being proactive. We're not waiting for governments to come to us. We're going to governments. We're going to governments, and we're open to chatting with any government that wants to chat with us, and kind of seeing, okay, what are the problems that you're facing with your IP systems, with your current intellectual property, stack, and how can we help improve it? And every government is going to have different problems. Every government's going to have different use cases, right? I think they're going to be similar because intellectual property is always kind of the same types, right? It's either creative works, it's trademarks, it's patents, but I think every government is going to have a different interpretation of it. Some governments are maybe more strict. Some governments are maybe a little bit more relaxed about intellectual property. But we're already in conversations with several governments. And I think again, much like with Story, for different verticals, for different niches, there's going to be different types of regulation. And aside from just, government to government, I think it's also one important aspect of legitimization is working with Web 2 companies as well, right? I'm not a really big believer in Web 2 or Web 3. Web 2 and Web 3 are the same thing. It's technology. Technology that's trying to solve problems for people. And for example, we're working on a shared standard that is across Web 2 and very popular in Web 2 with Adobe, Meta, TikTok, which is the C2PA. C2PA is a standard format for basically fingerprinting content and being able to see attribution and like where that attribution comes from. And so we're part of that collective. We want to be integrated as much as possible in the Web 2 sphere as well, right? Like we're not trying to just work within Web 3, we want to be in Web 2 as well. And I think that's a key driver of adoption is, okay, how ubiquitous are you? How widely used are you?
규제와 관련해서도 우리가 어떤 하나의 방향성보다는 뭔가 사용성마다, 유스 케이스마다 다 다른 사례들을 따르고 있고 국가들마다 또 다 차이가 있을 텐데 각 분야들마다 규제 이슈를 더 많이 받는 분야도 있고 그렇지 않은 분야들도 있다. 이렇게 말씀을 주셨습니다. 자, 그리고 좀 중요한 부분들은 결국은 이렇게 규제가 더 본격화된다는 것은 암호화폐가 더 제도권화가 되고 더 주류 자산으로 들어간다라는 부분으로 볼 수가 있습니다. 자, 거기에다가 이 스토리 같은 경우는 C2PA라고 해서 이 대기업들, 글로벌 대기업들의 어떤 표준을 따르고 있고 그 기업들이 속한 곳에 같이 포함이 돼서 프로젝트가 진행이 되고 있다는 부분들도 강조를 주셨습니다. 그만큼 전체적으로 규제에 대한 부분들에 대해서 많은 신경을 쓰고 있는 프로젝트다라는 것들을 강조를 주신 부분들인데요. 자, 정말 숨가쁘게 여러 가지 이야기들, 정말 인사이트 가득한 이야기들을 나눠봤습니다. 자, 오늘 멀리서 귀한 걸음을 또 해주셨는데요. 마지막으로 이 스토리프로토콜의 방향성과 목표 한번 들어보겠습니다.
First of all, thank you for having me here. I think our goal is very simple. Our broader vision, as we also discussed in the first video, is creating one single global shared state of IP, right? And we're going to do that in 3 different ways. The first way is making sure that we make it as easy as possible for anyone to register their IP, right? And for example, we recently launched the Story Portal, which is a no-code, user-friendly way to upload and register your own IP and set your own license terms without having to write any line of code, without having to know any legal stuff. It's all very, very easy, and I recommend everyone try to go to it. It's portal.story.foundation is the website. Things like that are the way in which we make it as easy as possible to register, to monetize, to license IP. But of course, we don't just want to do it through our own portal. We're working with applications like the ones that we talked about in this episode, like many others that are in the book and many more to come, where we want the applications themselves to register IP on behalf of what content is being created on their own platforms, right? So for example, Mahojin, anytime an image is created, it automatically gets registered and automatically gets linked. The more these things happen automatically behind the scenes, the more likely it is for IP to be registered, right? Because humans are lazy. Humans don't want to do things themselves. They want things to be done automatically. And I think it's very important that we meet those needs as much as possible and have these things happen as automatically as possible. So that's one big focus, right? Is making IP onboarding as easy as possible. And we're already working towards that. The second thing is bringing as many top IPs on Story as possible as well, right? Because the more interesting IPs are on the Story, the more likely people will want to remix them, to use them, and I think companies like Aria, companies like Ablo, companies like also Mahojin are doing a great job in bringing in some top tier IPs. For example, we have Emergence, which is a Hollywood level franchise created by David Goyer. David Goyer is behind some of the top Hollywood movies of all time, like The Dark Knight, like the new series Foundation. And this whole franchise is built to be built upon, meaning that it's based on, it's built, every single aspect of the IP is registered on Story, and the community is encouraged to extend it, to build it, and to create it together, right? And this is an example of how it's not just music IPs, it's not just fashion IPs, but it's also Hollywood IPs, it's also bottoms up community created IPs, right? And that are a really, really important driver of creation, of creativity. And one of our big focuses is obviously going to help the ecosystem onboard as many IPs as possible. And I think that the third layer, going back to your question earlier, this whole aspect of regulation, but not so much the regulation, more around how can we work with governments around the world to help bridge that gap between the old archaic systems that they use to track their IP and make it easier, more modern, more programmable, and work with them directly. And I think this is something that we're going to focus on a lot this year, is working with governments and really like helping them improve their whole IP stack.
네, 스토리와 관련해서 가고자 하는 궁극적인 방향성 3가지로 정리해 주셨는데요. 우선 IP 등록을 쉽게 한다라는 측면들 첫 번째로 있고요. 두 번째는 아마 가장 많은 관심사가 아닐까 싶은데요. 전 세계적으로 가장 인기 있고 가장 가치 있는 톱 IP를 끌어오는 부분들이 있습니다. 그리고 세 번째는 각국 세계 정부의 어떤 규제 이슈 속에서 규제에 대한 부분들을 잘 준수를 하면서 또 새로운 변화들을 이끌어내는 그런 부분들을 집중하겠다라고 말씀을 주셨습니다. 네, 지금까지 스토리 재단의 안드레아 무토니 이사장님과 굉장히 대장정을 마무리를 했습니다. 어디서도 들어보실 수 없는 깊은 인사이트들을 많이 들어볼 수 있었고, 이 IP와 AI와 더불어서 전체적인 이 블록체인과 암호화폐 시장의 흐름에 대해서도 다 정말 깊이 있는 인사이트를 전해주셨는데요. 아마 우리 크롱님들께도 많은 도움이 되었으리라고 생각을 합니다. 너무 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
네.
감사합니다.
네.
바이바이.
네, 그러면 지금까지 우리 스토리 재단의 안드레아 무토니 이사장님과 토크라운지 진행해봤습니다. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
감사합니다.